designed to encourage, empower, and educate real estate professionals by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and this is Calibrate Real Estate. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and this is episode 63 of our podcast. Well, I was in Bakersfield, California a few weeks back doing a paid keynote speech, and I want to say thank you to Michelle Valverde of the Bakersfield Association of Realtors, YPN. YPN was doing a lunch and learn, and they invited me. They paid me to come out and take some time to present to their lovely YPN group. I have a client that loves to say that people are into lunching and learning, and that's exactly what we did with this lunch and learn. Well, Bakersfield is starting to have a special place in my heart. I originally got to know the folks from Bakersfield, California through a friend of mine who was a 30 under 30 named Derek Sprague, who is based in Bakersfield. He introduced me to Linda J. And if those of you who've been followers of our podcast for a very, very long time, or if you haven't gotten this podcast yet, you could certainly go back into the archives and look at episode number 6, where I did another presentation for the Bakersfield Association of Realtors called Dear Younger Me. That was a speech that we made into a podcast. This is going to be a similar format where I'm going to be introduced by Michelle Valverde, and she's going to talk just about a little bit about me before I come on stage. I really hope you enjoy it, but before we do so, I want to say thank you to Tony Ione. Tony was our podcast guest 2 episodes ago, and I actually met Tony at this presentation that I did. The thing I liked about Tony is he said, Kyle, you have so much energy, and I just really feed off of that, and I appreciate you saying that, Tony. I also want to say thank you and a big shout out to Jamie Lister. Jamie was doing the audio for my microphone. He did that actually in both episodes of this speech that you're about to hear about overcoming adversity, as well as the speech where I did Dear Younger Me in episode 6. I'd like to say hi to Athena, to Derek, to Linda, to all my friends in Bakersfield, California. And for those of you that are tuning in on YouTube, the folks on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify aren't going to be able to see this, but I actually was a part of their YPN Leaders of Tomorrow section of their magazine. The Bakersfield Association of Realtors did a magazine for February, March, and it talks about my presentation here. As you know, real estate's a tough business. It's not for the faint of heart. So this episode's all about overcoming adversity. Enjoy this keynote presentation. And as I love to say, I will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
You listen to podcasts? Yeah? Okay. I'm always looking for new podcasts, and so I figured it would be a really good opportunity for us to share what podcasts we're listening to and why. And so this month, I'd like to pitch, actually, just shameless, right? Kyle Malnati actually has his own podcast. It is called Calibrate Real Estate Podcast, which is designed to encourage, empower, and educate real estate professionals by sharing best practices from proven winners. And I've listened to quite a few of them, and they're fantastic. I probably picked up something from every single interview he's had. So I believe this class is actually going on the podcast as well. So we'll share it on our Facebook page so you guys can listen and tune in there. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mr. Kyle Malnati. He is the CEO and founder of Calibrate Real Estate in Denver, and it is a commercial-based real estate company specializing in apartment building brokerage services and investment sales. In 2017, Kyle won the Denver Business Journal's 40 Under 40 Award and was featured on the cover of the Realtor magazine as 30 Under 30 in 2012. Kyle has been consistently awarded by the Denver Metropolitan Association of Realtors as a top 10 heavy hitter since 2007. You guys can give Mr. Kyle Malnati a warm welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. How's the levels there? We doing all right? Good. Okay. All right, so this is going to be active participation. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but who reads? Simply put, who reads? Okay, who reads books, not magazines? Who reads nonfiction books? Okay, who has read The Ideal Team Player? Good, very good. Okay, So next question, because we're going to be giving some of these books out. It's a book by a guy named Pat Lencioni. Pat, if you haven't heard of him before, great speaker, very animated, great author, writes fables with then an executive summary at the end. So this book, the thesis of the book is that the ideal team player must be three things: hungry, humble, and smart. And not like intellectually smart, people smart. So anybody in this room a team leader? Anybody in this room an owner of a company? Anybody that's an owner of a company want this book? All right, so come on up real quick and I'll grab you a copy of it. We bought these books a year or so ago and bought a boatload of them. So pass those out if you wouldn't mind. Okay, well, thanks so much, Bakersfield. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Kyle Malnati. I have been a realtor since 2004. It's the only career I've ever known, and I specialize in selling apartment buildings. Did that for a number of years, and then have transitioned into the broker-owner role as of 2 years ago. And golly, that has been a humbling experience for those of you that own companies or the broker in charge, or however your particular state might call it. But that's been quite humbling. And so one of the things we're going to talk about today is overcoming adversity, something that's become real familiar with me, and kind of that toying with how do you deal with things that don't go your way. So we're going to talk about adversity in such a way. There we go. So of a bunch of the topics that I have presented on, adversity seems to be the one that continues to come up over and over and over again. And it comes up on my podcast. It comes up in situations where I'll just be having a coffee appointment with someone in Denver, and they'll just start going on about something that I never expected the conversation to go that way. And so at times it feels a little bit like I'm a counselor or a therapist. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's my face or something, but people tend to share things that I just don't think they share with other people. And so how do you overcome adversity? Because here's the thing, every single person in this room, if you're young enough to have not faced adversity, you're going to. And if you're old enough, I've got like one gray hair that's kind of sprouting out. My wife thinks it's cool. I don't think it's so cool, but if you've got more than a gray hair or two, you've faced some adversity. You've faced some stuff, haven't you? And so the idea is, how do you deal with it? Do you have a process to deal with it? Are you expecting it? Do you have a way or a ritual or whatever it is to overcome it? So, quick story. Recently, I'm driving on Sunday after church. Courtney usually goes with us. This time she couldn't. I think it's that she wanted to stay home while I took the kids away from the house. We have 3 kids, all in elementary school, 16 months apart. How do you do that? You have twins at the end. A bunch of my buddies call it Irish triplets. And so our twins are now 2nd graders, and our oldest is a 3rd grader. We've got Charlotte, the 3rd grader, Henry and Amelia, the 2nd graders. The really funny thing, just real quick, not part of the story, but there are kids in the 2nd grade class that think that Henry and Amelia are different, and that they're not like in the same family, and that they might date someday because they're so fun with each other. And we have to remind them that they're brother and sister. That's why they know each other so well. So I'm driving along, and so come back from church, driving on a path that I know basically what to expect. I took a little bit different route though, because it snowed the night before. And if any of you have ever been to Denver, spring snowstorms are really common. And they're almost always preceded by amazing weather. So I kind of think like the pioneers must have been like, man, this place is great. You got these Rocky Mountains, this 55, 60 degree weather, and then wham, they get slammed by literally a snowstorm overnight. So we had a snowstorm. It wasn't too big of a deal, but it didn't really stick to the roads, but it definitely stuck to the grass. And so I thought, hey, it's Sunday, it's my day off. I would love to take the kids on this huge hill in our neighborhood. And I wanted to drive by it to see if anybody else was sledding, to see if there were friends or anybody else there. Well, we're sitting there in the left-hand turn lane. So if you've ever sat in a left-hand turn lane, we're sitting here like this. The light is green that I'm facing. I'm sitting there in the left-hand turn lane waiting for cars to pass. And I'm sitting there, not over the line or anything. I'm like right there. I'm not in the middle of the intersection or anything. And all of a sudden, out of my peripheral, coming the correct direction, but going right through a red light, is a minivan. The minivan hits a car coming the opposite direction of me. And I sit there and brace for it, and I know exactly what's going to happen. the car comes right into me. I'm driving. The white car was ours, not the gray one. But the gray one was the one traveling through the intersection that I was waiting for to pass. So I'm there in the white car. My wife's not in the front. Airbags deploy. I've never had that happen before. Never had airbags deploy. That is scary as all get out if you've ever had that happen before. 3 kids, all in one seat in the middle row. Bang! Like gunfire. I mean, that's what it sounds like when the airbags deploy. And all I could see right before that airbag deployed was these 2 cars careening towards me, and I was a sitting duck. Ever been like that before, where something's happened to you and it wasn't your fault? There was nothing you could do but just sit and watch and come and have it hit you. So I thought about this story and I'm like, man, that is so like life. You can do all the right things and you still get crunched, right? So to make matters worse, first of all, I'm standing here today. All 3 of our kids are still healthy, still alive, without a scratch. And you'll see the picture here in just a second. If I get, there we go. So Henry, Amelia in the middle, and Charlotte. Now, one of the things you don't know about Charlotte, but I will tell you, she's very reserved. She's just like her mother. She is as cold as ice. I took a photo not because I was trying to glamorize things. I took a photo because I was sending it to my wife because I called her right after the accident and said, we just got hit. I took the photo to say everybody's okay. And Charlotte had turned around, and I, just in taking the picture, I was taking pictures of the cars, all the stuff, all the evidence. I mean, you got to document everything right now, right? 150 photos of everything. And what happened is, as soon as I took that photo, Charlotte turned around in tears streaming down her face. The kids didn't know what happened. The twins, we call them the kids. They're all kids, but Charlotte knew exactly what happened, and she was scared. She was scared that she was not in control. She was scared that she didn't know what was going on. And in that moment, as a dad, I felt helpless. Thankfully, everybody was okay. Thankfully, really not a whole lot happened to us. Now, on the lighter side of things, that Acura that you saw there was my wife's first car that she ever paid for. So once she found out the kids were okay, she then asked if I was okay. Then, once she found out I was okay, she said, is my car okay? Because I was driving her car that day. And so all of a sudden, the first car that she ever paid for, and it was paid for in cash. So, any of you ever had a paid for free and clear car before? I know as a group of realtors that might be kind of a weird subject, but I hope not. I hope someday, but not too many hands there. But when you have a car like this that's paid off, you're real thankful. Because if you've ever gotten a car accident, usually that settlement, unless you call one of the late night attorneys that handle injuries, unless you call one of those guys, normally your settlement is not the value of that car. That car was worth far more to us, paid for, than it was in monetary value. And it's my favorite car because it saved my family. So one of the things that I want to just talk about today is, what do you do when you get blindsided? Everyone's safe, but you have these storms in your life, right? Storms in your life that you didn't ask for. They just come, they roll through. And what do? Sometimes you strike out. Sometimes it's your fault, right? That catastrophe or that adversity that you're facing is totally your fault. And other times, disaster strikes and it was intentional, right? Everybody remember this? This is ground zero, 9/11. So I was in college when this happened. I'll never forget where I was. It was with Courtney. Courtney and I are high school sweethearts. And we were getting ready for school that day. She was over at my fraternity house. You don't need to fill in any blanks there. We were just hanging out. She came over from her sorority house. She was not staying over the night before, Mom and Dad. And so 9/11 happens, and the world is ended, right? Until the next day. And the world didn't end. And so what was the reaction? What was everyone's reaction? I fortunately have had the blessing of seeing President Bush speak. I got to see him speak 2 years ago at a conference in Dallas. And I think that he is much maligned, but is a wonderful person once you see him speak, if any of you have. And so the days between the 11th and the 14th is when those 2 photos were. So that photo, if you don't recall, President Bush was reading to a 3rd grade class. I think it was in Florida. And he speaks about this when he presents. President Bush talks about getting that message that one of the towers had been hit. I don't think they knew that the other one had been hit by then, but they were like, we need to get you on Air Force One immediately. And what that was like is he was listening to a third grader read and was not going to interrupt her reading and run out. And he didn't want to cause any more controversy or concern than there already was going to be. So you can see at that perfect moment, the photographer captures that photo as he's hearing the news. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 days later, on the 14th, you've got this famous shot of him in the rubble doing the bullhorn speech. And resolved to get the people that did this to our country. And it's one of those things that I remember, if you recall too, and we see the American flag here, threefold, to my left, to your right, but I remember every single house had a flag in front of it for weeks, if not months. And I miss those times because I feel like our country, you know, it feels like it's a long time since that happened, but sometimes adversity is unifying, especially if you didn't deserve it and it came after you. So, where does adversity come from? As a commercial real estate agent, I remember really early in my career that a couple of clients would say, hey, I'm looking for a deal. Can you get me a deal with one of the D words? I'm like, what's a D word deal? What are you talking about, man? That's really weird. He's like, the D words, you know what they are. Disaster. That's when nature hits you. Someone you love messes up. You get divorced. Someone's on drugs, someone goes crazy, bananas, you want to save the relationship, but they don't. And then finally, the one that really trips us all up is the diagnosis. It's depression or a disease or someone dies. And these are real things that happen to us, and as top producers, as independent contractors, as people who don't make money by just showing up to work, you've got to actually move something, right? You've got to get out of the cave, go kill something, drag it home, then cook it, then give your splits to whoever, and you know, all of a sudden you get to eat. So those types of things do really happen. As it was mentioned, I host a podcast. I've actually hosted 2 podcasts in my career. One was more of a niche podcast on YouTube for real estate investors. The one that I'm passionate about is communicating to realtors. Because of some of the accolades I've won, and I try not to lead with that in my presentations, I've had an opportunity to meet some really cool people, and they've referred me to some really cool people. So this is Candace Skinner. Candace was a 30 under 30 honoree the same year as I was. And so we just kind of have this kinship because of that. Her husband was deployed, and this is, I believe, after 30 under 30. She kind of like made it nationally. Husband was deployed, she's from a small town in Louisiana, comes back with PTSD, is like missing, gone all the time, accidentally bumping into people's houses at night. I mean, crazy stuff. And she'd get calls from her clients and friends saying, hey, I saw your husband walking down the road the other day, you know, in a small community. That's real embarrassing, right? So how do you deal with that? Ashley Dietz Schaefer from Michigan. So before she and her husband were born and they have their current child, diagnosed with cancer, has a super rare childhood cancer even though he's in his early 20s, and has to go across the state to University of Michigan to deal with that. So the reason I flipped through these real quick is they're all on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Any of these you want to hear, I want you to hear the story from them. The whole idea is not I'm not gonna glorify someone's pain, but just realize if you're hurting, if you're struggling, there's a lot of people who have made some pretty big headlines and have also had some pretty big messes they've had to deal with. So divorce and foreclosure, Sean Modry. Sean Modry was a Keller Williams Bold coach, was a Titan at RE/MAX, all before he started his own company, Steps, but got divorced and basically got foreclosed on almost every single property he had, chose not to go through bankruptcy because he felt like it was his duty to pay off the remaining debt that hadn't foreclosed. So he just recently paid off something like 450 grand in debt that he really didn't have to. He could have just with a swipe of a pen said, I'm gonna go bankrupt. But he lost a marriage, lost really a lot of his confidence, and there's a gripping story about 30 minutes in that interview where his son, who's in high school, says, Dad, why can't we live in the neighborhood we used to live in anymore? And you can hear his voice break when he retells that story, like, what was it like to not provide for his son? Because his son just wanted to hang out with his friends. And Sean was really hiding behind a bunch of his failure, not stepping back into what he should do. I did not expect this. We didn't prep for this interview. A lot of podcasts I do prep. For whatever reason with my man Wayne here recently, so we're almost at 60 podcast episodes, so this was in the last month and a half. Wayne shares a story about how he basically got to a point where he was having marital troubles. I think there was an affair, I can't recall exactly. And he found himself on the floor in a warehouse, literally about to kill himself. And he realized at that point that no one was coming to save him. As sad as he was feeling, as depressed as he was feeling, as down in the dumps as he was feeling, no one was coming to rescue him. And he had to find a way to rescue himself. So he's become a real estate coach, and that's a powerful story. Rachel Magzouk, so this episode 14, now she's from a small town in Missouri. She didn't share this. I found it out 5 episodes later when I hosted a reunion with all the 30 under 30s from across the US and Canada, where she shared that she's continuing to struggle on a panel with postpartum depression. So those are things that are real. They're things that people walk around all day long, and you just never think of these issues until all of a sudden someone shares that story with you. Stephanie Lanier. Stephanie was the only one in this group who wasn't a 30 under 30, and that's an important point. It's not just about that accolade. That's a very nice honor. It was really cool to hear that call that I got when I heard in 2012 that I was going to be part of the class of 30 under 30. And it's gotten me an opportunity to be in this room. I wouldn't know any of you, wouldn't have a chance to talk to any of you if it weren't for Derek Sprague. He's my buddy. And so, you know, what happens though sometimes is you've got a diagnosis that follows. Her son Oliver has this very rare disorder. She has a team of experts that helps him on the regular every week, and she calls it Oliver Inc. because there's 6 people that they have to hire on staff to basically deal with his special needs. I'll let her share her story, but her mantra today is create the things you wish existed. And what that means, and you'll hear it in the podcast episode, is if there's something that touches your heartstrings and you don't see it out there in the marketplace, it's your calling to create that. And so she has. She's created several things in her life that have done that. And so one of the things she shared with me on the podcast, she said, some of the things, Kyle, that are so simple in life are the things that we all need. Most of us want to come to a conference or a lunch and learn or a networking event or a mixer or whatever it is to feel like they can get unstuck. And she said, really what you need is sleep, and a good 8 hours of it, good consistent sleep. And for anybody, and I'm not saying I was towing the major weight there, my wife was for sure, but for anybody who's had 3 kids under 18 months, all in diapers, sleep is a big luxury. We used to have grandmas, both of them, come Tuesday and Saturday to basically just allow us to sleep at night when the twins were born. So sleep is your secret weapon. Stretching, staying limber, little vinyasa flow if you're a yogi. All of those things, and I like that photo the best because it was right in front of the desk. I feel like I'm that way all the time. So she's like, it's your S's, it's your sleep, it's your stretch, and it's sweat. And I've heard that before. I've heard it in so many different ways, so have you. I haven't heard it described that way with the S's. I love the alliteration. I hadn't heard it that particular way, but I've heard that before. Okay, do all the hard work, do the things, you know, the Matthew McConaughey, like I gotta sweat 15 minutes every day type of thing, whatever. I just felt like there's gotta be a bigger system to this. So Andy Dane Carter's a guy from LA. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before. He's becoming really, really big. He's buddies with Ed Milet. He's done some podcasts with the Cardone family. I mean, he's like becoming really big. And so he taught me several things in this podcast episode of how you persevere. And I'd encourage you to watch that one. But what ended up happening is at one point, I realized that a lot of this content was already out there. Have you guys ever heard about this before, the making of a corporate athlete? Anybody heard that study by the Harvard Business Review? No one? Good, because it's like 20 years old. 2001 was when this article came out in January, the same year that September 11th happened. I wasn't even out of college yet. So the cool thing about this is every single one of you is going to be blessed with this content. And I didn't create it on my own, but I have made it my own through these podcast episodes because the same themes come up over and over and over again. When you face adversity, what do? How do you get up? How does life go on? So the first element is physical capacity. So one of the things to think about here is stress is a very natural byproduct of working out, doing anything of worth. You're going to have some stress involved in it. Stress is kind of one of those big things, but the study talks about from your physical capacity, it's more about the oscillation between your stress and your energy renewal or your recovery. For those of you that may work out and lift weights, you're going to see what we mean here in just a minute. Chronic stress without recovery is what depletes you. That's the battery on your cell phone that's running at 11% every day because I haven't gotten a new cell phone that needs a new battery. But what ends up happening is it makes you vulnerable to frustration, anxiety, and loss of concentration. So again, stress isn't the enemy. A lot of times people blame stress. I'm stressed out. That's why I've got to go get a drink. I'm stressed out. That's why I'm yelling at my kids. I'm stressed out. That's why I'm yelling at my clients. I guess none of you have ever done that, but that's something that I've done on the regular. And we are in a very stress-inducing industry, right? There's a lot of stuff that happens. And what do? We all go to happy hour, right? And pretend that it's all going to work out. And I'm not going to talk to you until I'm blue in the face about not drinking or anything like that. That's not going to be the point. But strength really comes from stress, the breaking down of something, the breaking down of your muscles, and then recovery. Does anybody like that photo? I thought that would just be perfect for this. But, all right. So one of the things that I really liked in the survey is it took a look at top competitors, and they said, okay, top competitors do certain things and they achieve certain things, and they do it differently than the rest of their opponents. How do CEOs, how do market leaders, how do people that are influencers do the same thing? And so they started to notice these things that they called rituals. I don't want to think it's like seances in the woods or something like that, but rituals are things that tennis players, like if you'll notice, if you watch tennis, you'll see the guy or the gal fiddling with their racket, looking at their strings, like, are the strings still there or something? I hit that one so hard, maybe the strings are gone, but are the strings still there? And what they're doing is they're concentrating on something that's so minuscule so that they can gain focus again. And that was one of the things that they noticed about it. And these precise recovery rituals are how they get back to top performance within 15 seconds after every point. So one of the things you'll notice is that top performers do all these weird little ticky things. I thought this would be apropos. So my wife and I, Courtney and I, go to Napa Valley a couple of years ago. I'd never been to wine country, was super excited about it. She was pregnant, so that means I had a DD, which was fun. So she had been there once before, and she's like, we gotta go, you're gonna do this work thing here. This is before the twins were born. This is when Charlotte was, when Courtney was pregnant with Charlotte. And so we're walking through a vineyard, and the guide is showing us around. I'm like, these grapes are really small. What's the deal here? And, you know, hey, I went to school at University of Wyoming. I have a bunch of buddies that are ag guys, but I'm a city guy. I grew up in some pretty major metropolitan areas, and I'm like, what's the deal with these puny little grapes? And they're like, oh, we actually intentionally stress the grapes out. I'm like, stress them out? What do you mean? Like yell at them or something? And they're like, no, we don't give them water all the time. And it was super duper hot, like so hot, Courtney had to take a break because she was pretty far along to delivering Charlotte. This was in September, and the weather was super hot in Napa, and Charlotte was born in November, so she was pretty far along. And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, how does that work? And they said when you stress the grape out, when you don't give it enough water, its potency is actually better. It's actually a better situation, and so they're real particular about it. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. The quote there that I like is that it yields a harvest of righteousness. So those of you that may have referenced that that's from Scripture. So it's one of my favorite proverbs, and it's, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's all about discipline. And the commentary is that no discipline seems right at the time. I'm losing my train of thought here, but no discipline seems pleasant at the time. There we go. But painful. However, it yields a harvest of righteousness. And the whole concept there, as I'm thinking about kids and I'm thinking about all these other things, is that discipline and adversity go hand in hand. Because those that are training for adversity to come are usually the ones who are able to overcome it. So the next part there, so we have the physical part, that makes a lot of sense. We've got our physical bodies, let's treat them right. That's pretty obvious stuff. So the emotional capacity, and this was some really interesting things that I thought of here as I was reading this Harvard Business Review. So the commentary was that positive emotions ignite energy. Positive emotions ignite energy, making you feel calm, engaged, focused, optimistic, and confident. One of the big topics right now in our world is this concept of flow. You guys heard about this? So flow is kind of that feeling like you're maybe 20 years ago in the zone. A lot of athletes, you'll hear that too. So that's where you're feeling like it's calm, that the game slows down. Everybody talks about Tom Brady, won his 6th Super Bowl. Belichick just won his 8th Super Bowl. The game slows down for them because they're feeling confident because of their preparation. For those of you that probably hate the Patriots, that may be, much to your chagrin, like it is to me, but as a Broncos fan, but, I digress. So, negative emotions, they drain your energy, and this is really obvious, right? You feel frustrated, or you're impatient, or you've got anger, fear, resentment. So, they talk about an executive that's in a lot of meetings, and this might have happened to you if you own a company or if you've ever led anybody, even if it's just a t-ball team or a soccer team. You feel like all that's coming to you is negative, and coach, why can't I go in? And coach, I want to wear this wristband as I'm playing basketball. It's the most annoying thing in the world. It's little second graders. They get these colored wristbands so that they know who to guard on the other team in basketball, so it's not like bunch ball where everybody's guarding one guy. And the biggest fight that we have in between substitutions is what color they get to wear. Seriously, 5 boys, I'm like, you don't get to pick here, just take them. So, but what ends up happening though, I think for a lot of people in meetings, is you get these situations where you're feeling the crazy come on. You're feeling like someone is agitating you. And maybe it was something that happened to you earlier, maybe you got out of the house late, maybe you didn't sleep real well last night for whatever reason, and they're just picking at you. Maybe it's just me, but that happens all the time, doesn't it? So what they coach this executive to do is close his eyes, and he did this literally within 5 seconds. Close your eyes, take several deep breaths, relax your facial muscles, soften your voice, speak more loudly, and frame a positive response, because you can do all that and then blast at someone, can't you? But that's not what they said, obviously. Frame this in a positive response. And so some of the things that we need at times of therapy. I'm not going to ask anybody to raise hands, but I'll raise mine. So I've gone to therapy for the last year. And if you look at all the accolades, now it's not my wife and I, we're not like in marital troubles, and that's not a bad deal if you are. But I've had coaching for years. I've got all these consultants I've worked with, and all of a sudden I realized I've got a licensed psychologist in my office building downstairs in a different suite, and I've got all these problems, all this drama from starting this new company 2 years ago, and I don't know how to deal with it because I've never been there before. And I'm thinking that I've gone crazy because all these people are causing all these issues, and I'm like, is it me? Is it them? Is there something I'm doing to spur them on? And there's all this drama, and there wasn't drama before we started our own company. You see, we had a team. There was a really high productive team at another brokerage firm, and we all left and started a company. Anybody ever heard that story before? Right? It happens. And what ends up happening is usually the top producer or the person who's got kind of things figured out is the leader. And what happens is that person is used to being successful by being out of the office with his clients, or her clients, his clients, her clients, just kidding. So I'm used to being out of the office, making it rain, right? And that's what people talk about. You gotta find a rainmaker, and if you're a young person, you should meet with a rainmaker, and you should work with them and have them mentor you and all this other stuff. But what happens when it comes to leading people? It's like trying to pin Jello to a tree. These people are crazy. Or maybe it was me that was crazy. I didn't know until I talked to a therapist. My therapist's name is Galena Rhodes. I'm not embarrassed to say that. It's actually on my Instagram. Walking through therapy one day, I just snapped a photo and got some of the coolest responses. Some of the responses were, gee, I hope that you're okay. From my aunt in Washington, D.C. My wife was like, what did you put on Instagram last night? She's like, I saw the email at 4:30 in the morning. They're 2 hours ahead of us in D.C. versus Denver. But I'm like, oh, I just shared that I was at Galena's office. And she's like, yeah, but people don't know that. I'm like, well, they do now. Is that okay to my reserved wife that's like, let's just keep this stuff in the background. You've got things figured out. You go be our warrior. And that's what I was feeling. I was leaving the house every day. My wife, Courtney, worked for 7 years at Oppenheimer Funds. Super smart. I believe she's smarter than me. I believe she could run the company better than me, but I'm the one who gets to run the company. We started 2.5 years ago, and I didn't realize how much help I needed. I needed a lot of help. And one of the hardest things when you're feeling emotionally down, and And I don't know if there's someone in this room that feels that way right now, is asking for help. Because you're used to being Superman or Wonder Woman, or whatever your favorite superhero is. So one of the things from an emotional standpoint that this study found out is that music has really powerful psychological and emotional effects. It's why you see athletes with their tunes on and their Beats by Dre or whatever the newest headphones are, bopping around, as they're getting ready for the Super Bowl, because it hits you at a different level. As I was driving through the canyon, I'm listening to whatever radio station would actually come in through the canyon, because I don't know the stations here, and I'm just having a great time because I know I'm going to get to present to some of my friends that are realtors today. And that got me amped up. That got me into a different level of thinking, right? So sometimes it's just putting on your favorite tune. Remember that scene from Rain Man where Tom Cruise is singing Free Fallin'? You just love it, don't you? God rest your soul, Tom Petty, one of my wife's favorite musicians. So this is actually in the great state of California. Everybody's probably been there before, Disneyland. So that's me, striking a pose. My son, Henry, he's got pretty big arms, doesn't he? And this dude, look how big that guy's leg is. That one leg is like the size of my son's waist. Really nice guy. I was talking to him, and they actually wear like pads, like football players do, to make it look even bigger. But one of the things that I have learned as a speaker, so the Colorado Association of Realtors does a media spokesperson training, of which I have taken that course, and I've become dubbed as an official media spokesperson, right? So one of the things that the presenters of this training talks about is that if you get nervous, and we all do, I even got nervous right at the beginning, is I haven't met most of you in this room. And it's kind of difficult to be confident in front of a group of people. You don't know what they're thinking, you don't know where they're from, you don't know the goof ups that they've had, and they're sitting here real quietly looking at you, because you drove from LA in 2 hours, and all of a sudden, what are you thinking? And so I'm sitting here and I'm like, what do I do? And I remember that this presenter talks about making big gestures. So one of the things that happens, and happens in nature all the time, but when you're nervous, flexing your feet within your shoes is one of the strategies they teach you. Making big circular movements with your arms is one of the strategies they teach you. It creates confidence. It was one of those things where I just picked that up a couple of years ago, then I saw it again and I'm like, oh, that's really, really cool. So I actually did that today. Mental capacity. So one of the things that happens a lot of times here is you're gonna have, going from emotional to mental, you're gonna have some situations that will occur in the next week where you've solved a problem doing the mindless, most stupidest thing ever. Like you're on a jog, you're in the shower, washing the same area that you do, while doodling, you've gone fishing, and all of a sudden you solve life's problems in this mundane exercise. And why does that happen? Meditation actually serves as a practical means of training attention and promoting recovery, says the study. So one of the things that's really interesting, has anybody heard of an author named Brendon Burchard? Perfect, good. High Performance Habits. The book is free, and it is 350 pages thick. It was originally something like 1,480 pages from all the research he did. Brendon Burchard's a thought leader, like look him up. I got told to look up Brendon Burchard 5-6 years ago, and only figured it out a couple months ago when he was on several different podcasts that I like. The one that I really, really enjoyed, and I literally listened to it today. So I'm not giving you any advice that I haven't personally consumed myself. He does a great interview on December 17th of last year with Rachel Hollis. And it's a phenomenal interview all about his book. One of the things that Brendon picked up is that there's a performance app that literally 4 million people downloaded, and it was checklists and all those different things on how high performers get things accomplished. And they found out that the highest performers work less than an hour on any particular topic. Literally 52 minutes was the average. There used to be a bunch of studies, and the Harvard Business Review in 2001 had it up to 90 minutes. And that was the old school thought, is like work 90 minutes, work an hour and a half on something, crank through it. But what they actually found out is that actually too long. And I wonder, there's part of me that wonders, does that have anything to do with maybe a little bit of our attention deficit disorder culture that we have? That everything's buzzing and whizzing and zinging in our pockets. But 52 minutes, if you want to accomplish anything, is the right amount of time. And so Brendon, what he does, he has all these triggers, and I'll talk about a couple of them. One of them is he has an alarm on his phone. If you have an iPhone, I know how it works. If you have a Droid, sorry, I don't know how that works. But on the iPhone, you can set an alarm for anything. And you can label that alarm anything you want. You can actually change the name of the alarm. And so he has several alarms that he goes through in that interview with Rachel Hollis that are literally his alarms that 10 years later he still does. Some of them are show his wife affection. Because sometimes he'll get so focused in, and he's a high performer, and that's how intentional he is. An alarm will buzz, and he'll go, oh my gosh, whatever I was doing, I need to stand up, go find my wife, because I was working at home, and just give her a hug, or tell her that I love her. So 52 minutes, he said, and then you literally have to stop. You have to change your environment. He suggests getting out, like literally walking outside, doing a quick little power walk for half a block or whatever, grabbing water, going to the bathroom. I typically anymore can't make it more than an hour without going to the bathroom. I don't know what's going on. I'm almost 40 now, I guess. But he said that 52 minutes is really what needs to happen to make things productive, and that's what the high performers do. So the step-by-step process for meditation. For me, meditation is a really kind of weird topic. I've interviewed a couple of people. Andy Dane Carter was one of those interviews earlier in the slide deck. Another guy's a guy by the name of Ivan Estrada from LA. Ivan has been on all these top producing television programs, Bravo and all this other stuff. And he talks about how he meditates. And I'm like, what? It sounds weird. Like, what is meditation? And a lot of times people think of that as being some sort of spiritual event, right? And meditation actually can just literally be a reset. It literally, you turn off your computer and turn it back on because it went haywire, right? So sit quietly, breathe deeply, count each exhale, start over when you reach 10. The secret element here, they said the fifth element was one of the highest performers. They would repeat a word each time they breathed, something that they wanted to intentionally put in their life. Brendan Bouchard's word that he shared with that Rachel Hollis podcast interview is the word release. So, good stuff. I think that that's really talking about what I was just talking about a moment ago, is that the myth is that meditation is strictly spiritual. It's some sort of, event, some retreat in the woods, and it doesn't have to be. You literally can do it at your desk. The doorway triggers thing was the really cool thing that Brendan shared. And this is fascinating to me. And this is something I just recently learned from my therapist. So my therapist had commented to me that, Kyle, you literally work above my office. Like, your commute from my office to your office is pretty short. It's like a stairway. And most people have the ability to get in their car, or sit in like the receiving room, or drive home, or whatever, like some sort of like disconnection. And she said to me, and this is after a year of working with her, I went through some really, really interesting stuff about my childhood, and you're gonna hear that story in a little bit here. She said to me, she's like, you probably should go on a walk. Like, go somewhere, go get a cup of coffee, like literally just kind of like let your brain rest, because you just spent 50 minutes, which is interesting, by the way. They charge you for an hour, but you only get 50 minutes. Those therapists are onto something. 52 minutes. Yeah? So Brendan talks about the doorway triggers. And I love this depiction because we have all these doorways literally that we go through in our life. And it's the same idea as leaving therapy and saying, what's this next appointment I'm going to go into? And if you're anything like me, I'm sure that there's some people out here that have gotten a text message, a phone call, and someone shouting in their office all at once. And then you answer the phone like you're going to be totally like connected to who's calling, and it's usually a number you don't know, but as realtors, we're the only crazy people who answer numbers we don't know. Everybody else just screens those calls or deletes them or whatever, but those are leads for us, right? So, the doorway triggers, and you can read it up there, but Brendan says every time he enters a doorway, and I've only gotten sort of a little good at this. I'll do it like once a day if I'm really thinking about it, but he says every time he enters a doorway, he's passing into a new experience, and that sounds very existential. Pretty cool word, isn't it? What he says, though, is I enter this room a happy man ready to serve. And one of the things that he has noticed throughout his life as he's built his career up as a public speaker and an author is that for him, a lot of people will come to him asking for basically him to put them on his stage. And he's like, now that I've become popular and there's a lot of people who like me, all of a sudden this happens all the time. And he's like, one of the things that I wanted to really create in my life is I did want to meet US presidents. This is Brendan Bouchard, not me. I would like to meet a president. But Brendan Bouchard has said, I'd love to meet a president, I'd love to meet Oprah, but I'd rather serve them. I'd rather help them than just meet them or have them help me. And so literally he speaks this into his life. He's spent a bunch of time with Oprah Winfrey, he's met several US presidents, and he's worked with some really, really top athletes. Pretty cool stuff. Finding your happy place and disconnecting. Now anybody who goes fishing or goes to the mall to just like check out stuff and touch fabrics but not buy anything, I don't really get that, ladies, but guys don't really do that. We buy stuff and then leave as quickly as we can. But I have a buddy that has been an avid fisherman for 20 years. I'm kind of like, his little kid brother, even though we're the same age, because I'm constantly getting the rod all tangled up and he has to fix it for me. But finding your happy place, just that like mundane thing, again, you're solving that vexing problem by just doing the little things, the doodling, journaling, all sorts of things that we'll talk about. But I love the idea of going fishing. So the last one, the fourth one, we went from physical to emotional to mental to now spiritual. Watch out. We're going to keep it PC, but we are going to talk about some real stuff. So the word spiritual prompts some really conflicting emotions for people. Everybody's got their own ideas of what spiritual means. I do go to church. I said that. That's how we got in the accident. We were coming home from Sunday at church with the kids. And there's a lot of people that say, I don't want to deal with all that, but I'm spiritual. What does that mean? Well, we'll talk about it here in just a second. So the capacity that they found in this study, the Harvard Business Review, they found that spirituality serves as sustenance, i.e. food, for your soul, in the face of adversity as a powerful source of motivation, focus, determination, and resilience. So they suggest you find a ritual that allows you to disengage from work and tap into a profound source of purpose or meaning. So here's kind of the heady stuff that we'll go through here in just a minute. So my personal career coach is a New York Times bestseller. It's a guy named Rory Vaden. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book Take the Stairs. It's a New York Times bestseller about 7 years ago. Rory told me in 2012, I had just gotten the 30 under 30 accolade. Here's a picture of Rory. Oh, not Rory. There's Rory. I'll go back to Rogers in a minute. So there's Rory and I at his house in Nashville, Tennessee. No, you can't have the address of his house, but Rory, we're that close that he invited me over to his house one day as I was traveling into Nashville to see another buddy. And that type of a relationship started years ago when he was doing personal coaching for top producers like myself and helping people get clarity, helping people get unstuck. And I told Rory, it was 2012, it was the summertime, I just closed a couple of monster deals. The kids, the twins, again, I call them kids, I don't know why, Charlotte's a kid too, but the twins were just a year old. They were born in March of the year prior, 2011. And I closed a couple of like six-figure commissions, like big commissions. I was making some real money. And I felt weird. I felt like hollow. And Rory said, well, what do you mean? And I was like, I don't know, like everything seems to be going right. Like all this crazy stuff happened last year with the twins being born, all this mess, and I just don't really feel right. And he's like, are you going to church? He's like, are you doing something to like connect with a deeper purpose? And I was like, no, I grew up Catholic, and I was an altar boy, and like I went to Catholic school, and I did all this stuff. He's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. He's like, go somewhere where what you hear on Sunday makes you a rock star on Monday. It's like, I don't care where you go, but just go somewhere that you can tap into your inner purpose. So Rory gave me that advice in 2012, and I said, all right, Rory, sounds good. So that was advice number one. After 6 hours in his office in Tennessee on a super hot, sweaty day, thank goodness they had air conditioning, he gave me 2 pieces of advice. That was item number 1. Item number 2 was go read the Total Money Makeover. And if you haven't read that, you gotta go read it. Rory wouldn't give it to me. I gave away a bunch of books today. That one is on you. You gotta pay for it. But the Total Money Makeover is written by a guy named Dave Ramsey and changed my life. So, purpose. Episode 23, or 21, excuse me, of our podcast, Rogers Healy, who has started a company about 10 years ago as a 30 under 30 and was dubbed the celebrity realtor in 2008. Part of the reason was Tony Romo was one of his best friends. Tony Romo at that time was dating Jessica Simpson, and Jessica Simpson was running around Dallas, kind of like hiding out from a bunch of different things with Rogers Healy as my realtor shirt on, like getting caught by paparazzi and stuff. Wouldn't you guys like to have that as your billboard, right? So Britney Spears is sorry, it was not Jessica Simpson, it was Britney Spears. I got that totally messed up. Jeez, I just screwed it all up. That's all right, we all make mistakes. So Britney Spears is running around with that shirt on. So Rogers talks about making that transition from top producer, from cool guy, to being a broker owner and having a lot of really crazy stuff happen. Growing a company to over 200 people in Dallas-Fort Worth, having some of his best friends say goodbye to him because he had totally lost his soul. You know, he never did anything unethical or anything, but he just basically lost his purpose. And what it took for him to find his purpose again. So I encourage you to listen to that episode. If prayer is something you don't know how to do, it's something that I've had to work through a bunch, and some of you are probably much better at it than I. James Nellis from Washington, D.C., also a fellow 30 Under 30, did a whole episode with me about that. And it's something that you guys can learn more about. But really what happens when you're talking about spirituality is about reflection. However you decide to do it. It could be to a certain deity. It could be, this spot here where it's a beautiful lake that you're looking at, but it's all about reflection. A lot of times it's about journaling and asking yourself questions. And if you've ever been someone who just journals and you're like, why am I writing all this stuff and why do I fill up all these journals? And my wife's like, what are you doing with all these journals? Are we throw any of them out ever? I'm like, no, they're my journals. And what ends up happening is it's really just getting your thoughts out on paper, right? And it's connecting with who you are and what you were made to be. Speaking of purpose and speaking of connecting with who you are and who you're made to be, some of you that were in the room 2 years ago when I was invited to speak to the Leadership Council here for Bakersfield. We were down in LA, but I was invited to speak to the leaders of your association. I shared with them my purpose. So we talked a little bit about my podcast. We've talked a little bit about working with top performers and how to overcome adversity. But one of the things you probably need to hear is that if you're not connected to something real and something purposeful in your business, you're never, ever going to get it. And I will tell you that for a long time I've struggled with this whole concept of find your why, start with why. And I know Simon Sinek has become very, very popular with his TED Talk because of that, and his book Start With Why. And that's something we talked about last time, 2 years ago. But Simon Sinek is not the first person to talk about it. Viktor Frankl, if you think back 70 years ago, Holocaust survivor, Nobel Peace Prize winner, talked about it. A man's search for meaning. I mean, there's lots of different talks about finding purpose and finding meaning. Here's my purpose. This is Jim. That's me on the right, a little bit younger, and maybe just one gray hair in the front there. But Jim and I are standing out in front of his condo in Denver's Cherry Creek neighborhood. Jim's an apartment building investor. I met Jim, it's been now 12 years, but at that time it had been about 10 years since I'd known Jim. I met Jim because I cold called him. As an apartment broker and as a commercial realtor, I wasn't working with my friends because most of my friends didn't have $1 million. So I was making cold calls all the time in 2004, 5, 6, and 7. And so I cold called Jim one day. He owned an 8-unit apartment building in Denver, and I just started talking to him. He's like, there's something about you that just, and I found this out later after talking to Jim, but he's like, there's just something about you that felt like different from salespeople. And so one of the things that I got the fortune of doing is this is Jim on the night of his retirement party. So now, I don't know about you, I've never been to a retirement party. Not really that old, and not a lot of people work somewhere long enough anymore to actually have a retirement party. Maybe the association has some of them for people that are in the emeritus level of realtors, but there's so many things that have to go right for someone to have a retirement party. You can't pass away early, you can't do anything dishonorable, all those other D words, death and all that. So Jim worked for Lockheed Martin for 32 years as an aerospace engineer. He literally is as smart as a rocket scientist. And Jim did something different from most of his colleagues. He saved his money, he lived on less than he made, and invested it in real estate. He invested in a house and then a fourplex and other things along the way. I met him when he had an 8-unit. Jim and I have worked on 5 transactions together. Even though this picture is almost 2.5, 3 years old now, I have just completed 2 transactions with him this year. And at that retirement party, we're in this big, busy room, there's all this buzz going on, and Courtney and I are there, and I mean, literally, it's the size of this room, and it is jammed. We come in the back door there, come over, we see Jim, he's kind of a tall guy, you can see he's much taller than me, and he waves from here, and I'm way back there. And I'm like, we gotta kind of like work through, like if you've ever been like in a crowded restaurant or something like that. And so we get to Jim. Courtney's met him like maybe once. Hey Jim, this is Courtney. Hi Courtney, how's it going? Courtney, this is Jim. You know, she's like, congratulations, this is so awesome. Here's your bottle of wine. Like, we're so excited for you. And he goes, thank you. And I'm like, well, you're welcome. It's a bottle of wine. Like, cool. And he's like, no, thank you. I was like, okay, what is he about to say? It's a little loud. And he's like, thank you for helping me retire. And I'll tell you, as a realtor, I'd never heard someone say that to me before. I grew up in a family that had financial struggles, the type of family that we would have collectors calling us every night, to the point where when caller ID first came out, we would check it and we'd not answer. Or you'd answer because you're on the upstairs phone that didn't have the caller ID, for those of you who are that old that know that. And you'd accidentally answer, where's your mom, where's your dad? It was a really, I mean, we grew up middle class and things seemed all right, but they weren't. I mean, there were collector calls happening all the time. So for me, retirement's a really, really big thing. It's a big purpose. So much so that it's become our mission at Calibrate Real Estate. Our mission is that we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. Simple enough. It's 11 words. So your purpose is something that you need to attach to that strongly. That's spiritual. That's purpose-driven work. That means that you're doing work that matters. And if you're selling the American dream, if you're helping people buy a house for the first time, the second time, or the 20th time, or if that house is a lake house, because they get to have their grandkids hang out there, I mean, you're doing work that matters. So anybody that's ever said to you that you're not doing it, they're wrong. They're totally wrong. We are doing work that is part of the American fabric. And I think it's really, really important to connect that deeply in what you do. So the whole point here is that when you have rough days, when you have to overcome adversity, a lot of times you've got to connect with stuff like this. And I've been blessed enough to have someone like that that's been loyal enough to work with me for so many years that he can say something like that to me. And thank goodness it was in front of my wife. Because I'm constantly talking about the things that people say, and she doesn't ever get to actually hear it. So that was pretty cool. Butch Piper. So I kind of gave the story away here because you see that he passed away recently. We started the company right after Thanksgiving in 2016. A year later, Butch came into our office about a week before Christmas. This is 2017 now. Butch and his wife Patty, you can see them on the left there. There's Butch again on the right. Butch was one of these guys that just lit up a room. And there was something really, really wrong. There was something really weird going on that day. And he said, hey guys, we were looking for him. We were helping him sell an apartment building. He was looking at moving his business a little bit closer to home. He owned buildings about 20 miles away from where he lived, and the buildings that he owned were kind of more in the city. He lived in the suburbs, and he wanted to own something a little bit farther away. So the idea was we were going to sell this building to just kind of trade it so he would do some management closer to home. And he came in to us, to our office in mid-December. One of my coworkers and I, he sat us down and he said, guys, I've got stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And I don't know if you've ever had a client or a friend or anybody say that to you. I have never, ever had someone say that to me before. And that's a death sentence, right? So that was December 2017. 5 months later, he was gone. I had the fortune, literally 2 weeks ago, Patty was in my office. Patty's taken over the business. She always did all the leasing. She put stuff on Craigslist and Hot Pads and other places, and Butch would do all the maintenance. He would do the showings and he would do the maintenance because that was what his career was before he owned apartment buildings. And Butch would tell me when he would run around town in Denver, he's like, Patty's got a list of showings for me today. I got 11 of them. She's really got me working. And he's like, but that's okay because I know we're doing stuff that's going to benefit our kids and our grandkids. And so when someone like that dies, someone that has impacted you in such a positive way, you feel like literally part of you dies too. And so one of the things that I have learned is that you've got to remember people for what their impact was. So we named an award this year in our company called the Butch Piper Momentum Award. And it's a special award that it's basically like a Rookie of the Year or someone that's created a bunch of momentum, because what happened in that next 5 months was really important. I saw a man on a mission, a man that had literally a death sentence that he was going to try to get it treated, and he was going to do some stuff, both Western and Eastern medicine stuff, to try to just get the cancer gone. But you knew with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, it was unlikely. So what happened is they adopted this mantra that God's got this. God's going to figure it out. It may mean that Papa's going to go away, but God's got this. And so we made all these shirts for him. These God's got this shirts, and that's Patty and Butch and their adult children, and this is one of the grandkids. And that shirt was sitting on the table at his funeral. That had hundreds of people there, most of which I didn't know. And to know someone for just a few years and to have a shirt that was produced in January of the year he died on his table at his funeral, that's the impact that you can have. That is the type of stuff that we do as realtors. So Rory taught me one other thing. And if you've ever heard this before, you're going to hear it again. But when it comes to adversity, it's kind of interesting. In the Rocky Mountains where I live, it's one of the only climates that has both buffalo and cows. It's kind of an interesting conundrum there to have buffalo and cow in the same plains, but it's very interesting because in nature, buffalo and cows do very different things when storms approach. The really quick story, so we stay on time, is that buffalo do what's opposite of what everybody else does, what cows do. Cows run away from the storm, actually making their time in the storm prolonged. They actually feel more rain, they feel more turmoil, they feel more stress because they're running along with the storm. And if you've ever seen a cow run in Bakersfield, California, they're not that fast. Buffalo, they see, and we've got this really interesting topography in Denver. You've got the mountains that then roll into the Kansas plains. So the Colorado Rocky Mountains roll into the Kansas plains, and you can see on a stormy day, you can see the storm coming, and you can see it for miles. And so buffaloes see it, and they charge into the storm, minimizing their pain. So as you think about adversity, that's just a really cool story for me to share with you of how you can be like a buffalo and have that buffalo mentality. Anybody ever heard of Og Mandino? So Og Mandino was a bombardier in the 40s, got a job after being in the service, got a job in sales, and traveled a bunch. Got to a situation where, because he traveled so much and he would go to bars to kind of unwind, became an alcoholic. Got divorced, and there's a story, it's a true story of Og looking in a pawn shop window in Cleveland on a snowy night, thinking about buying a revolver to kill himself. And the only thing that stopped him is he could hear the church bells of a cathedral just a few blocks away, and went into the cathedral instead of the pawn shop. And that was before he wrote The Greatest Salesman in the World. If you haven't read it, that was one of those books that Rory told me to read when I first started working with Rory. So Og says, never feel shame for trying and failing, for he who has never failed is he who has never tried. If you haven't read, here's a sneak peek in what you can read. So the 10 ancient scrolls, I'll go through these kind of quick just so we stay on time. Today I will begin a new life, number 1. Number 2, I will greet this day with love in my heart. Number 3, I will persist until I succeed. Number 4, I am nature's greatest miracle. Number 5, I'll live this day as if it was my last. Live this day as if you were dying, basically, an old Tim McGraw song. Today I'll be the master of my emotions. Number 6, I will laugh at the world. Number 7, today I will multiply my value 100-fold. Number 9, I will act now. Number 10, I will pray for guidance from God. So that was the lesson that came out of his adversity, which was getting divorced. Something that came up recently for me is just these struggles at work. And my career coach, Chris Oakley, who worked for Entreleadership, worked me through an exercise there that you can hear in episode 5. It's called the 4 Insights. Any of you that are team leaders or someone that are goal-oriented, these are really, really important, but we're going to have to go quick. The 4 Insights, you ask 4 questions of the team. And as the leader, you stand up there humbly and you be quiet. And it's really, really hard. But you get up there with the whiteboard paper, you put 4 pieces of whiteboard. I literally am having this exercise on Friday, so I'm practicing what I'm preaching here. And the first question is, what is working? And the answer is, let's amplify it. You literally bullet point out. You can't speak as the leader. You just have to sit there and listen to bullet points. You can help stimulate the conversation. Question number 2 is, what's broken? And the answer is, let's fix it. Question number 3, what's missing? Let's add it. And this is hard because it's missing because usually you don't have enough money to afford it, because everything is missing that you don't have, right? Number 4, which is the most humbling of all questions, what's confusing? Because it's the leader, you made it confusing. Let's clarify it. So the quick hitter there, if you want to see all of them all at once, if you want to take a photo of this, you can. What's working, what's broken, what's missing, what's confusing. And there's the answer. So that's the 4 insights exercise. Another great way to handle adversity. The after action review, this is something we reviewed. What's that?
Justin's not a great slide.
The after action review is something we reviewed 2 years ago. It's still apropos. My brother is in the Army. Anybody that's in the military might know this. Is after every single mission, not just a failure, what was the plan? What actually happened? What went wrong? What went well? And what can we do to improve the process for the next time? Another question we ask ourselves around our organization. And the goal is to improve the soldier, leader, and the unit performance, not to cast blame on anybody. Okay? Failure is an event, it's not a person. So failure is something that happened, a person's not a failure. So finally, last slide here. So these are our kids. This is in 2011. This is when the twins were born. It was probably around April. I don't really remember. My wife took the photo. Courtney does exist. She hasn't been in any of the photos. She has to screen the photos before she can be in them. So it's the way it goes, ladies. You might understand. So this is a photo. This is literally what it was like to feed the kids. So Charlotte is about 20 months old there. The twins are about a month or 2 old. This was when they were actually clean for some reason, and they were sleeping, which is wonderful. Amelia's in the top right with the burp cloth. Henry is in the cradle there at the bottom with my legs. And then Charlotte is obviously the bigger one with the purple. So this presentation was really important for me to be asked to do this today. I actually came up with a different presentation. And then I got an email to me that the advertisements were the Overcoming Adversity presentation that I had kind of pitched. And I realized I had to pivot pretty quick because I had a different presentation prepared. And so that's okay, I'm swift and nimble, but this story is a brief one. But in 2011, I had 3 major life events happen in 90 days. You can hear more about it in other podcasts or other conversations with me afterwards, but I'll go through this pretty quick. I was a top producer working at a company that was a startup and was started up by my mentor, which was Courtney's cousin. Great guy named Matt. We still get together today. I was in the process of leaving that company. And if anyone's ever left a company, you kind of got to do that on the sly. Not that you're trying to be deceitful, but it's kind of a public thing, and as a realtor, you got to be real careful about leaving a company. So the first couple of months of the year, I was contemplating this. The twins were born, and the guy who was recruiting me was a former client of mine. I had helped him buy apartment buildings, but he also owned a real estate brokerage firm, and he used real estate investments to supplement his business. So I told the guy, I said, hey, look, kids are coming, can we just kind of put these conversations on ice a little bit? I don't know what's going to be like going from 1 to 3. I just don't know what that's going to be like. And Courtney was working, now she's not working. That was the biggest change for me financially, is that she was working when Charlotte was born. She decided she wasn't going to be working. I was totally for that. And I wanted to bless our family by being the provider and allowing her to experience the nightmare for the next year. No, I'm just kidding. No, but to experience having our kids there. Who can teach a child better than their mama, right? So, that was something that was really, really cool for me. So I'm going through this mental just turmoil of how do I leave my mentor? But at the same time, there's this really sweetheart deal that I was getting at this new company, and the twins are being born. So fast forward to May, I'm about to make the decision, and I get a phone call that night. It was May 16th, 2011. The twins were 2 years old. Actually, they're two years old. They're 2 months old, sorry. Their 2-month birthday was the 20th of May, but that doesn't really matter. And I got a phone call from my brother from Washington, D.C. He said, hey, I just got a phone call from the sheriff. I'm like, sheriff, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, Billy's dead. Billy's our other brother. It was at University of Alabama, and he had died in his sleep that night. He was born with a congenital heart defect, so this wasn't a huge surprise, but he was 24 years old, so we thought he had kind of outlived it. He had that diagnosis that we felt like he was the miracle baby. And Make-A-Wish wasn't a real big deal when I was growing up, but we would have been a Make-A-Wish family. My parents at the same time, I think, were a bit too proud to actually go through any of those channels because we probably still would have been able to do it. But when your brother dies and you're older than him and you know that every birthday you have is going to exceed the life that he lived, that changes you. And so I still decided to make that change to the new company. My mentor thought that I was acting out of emotion. And he thought, hey, you've had a really traumatic event. And he was probably right. You probably shouldn't make a decision this major. You already have the kids, your brother just died, and now you're gonna leave. But I left. And it was, this was the story that was featured in my Realtor Magazine 30 Under 30 article. I applied for that twice. I applied for it the year before the twins were born and didn't get a call back, didn't even get into the final round of 50. The year that I shared this story, I was on the cover of Realtor Magazine 30 Under 30 in May of 2012. And to bring things back, that hot, sweaty afternoon in Nashville, Tennessee, where I was hanging out with Rory Vaden, that was in July of 2012. And now you probably understand and know why I was feeling a little bit empty, even though I had succeeded through the next year. And I think that the thesis of this whole story is that every single one of you is going to have successes, and they're all going to be relative to your own story. But those successes, around the corner, there's going to be some adversity, because there's a saying that says, new levels, new devils, right? And so for me, this was something I wasn't prepared to deal with. I wasn't prepared to bury my brother. And I don't think anybody ever will be. My parents weren't prepared to bury their son, and they've never been the same. And there's been some really, really difficult conversations in our household. But at the same time, it's also been a really, really unifying thing. And the twins never got to meet Billy. Charlotte did. Charlotte, there's pictures of her holding Billy, or Billy holding her. Gosh, I get so emotional, I can't make any sense. But there's pictures of Billy holding her, but not the twins. He died before they were born. And I had asked him, the last communication I had with him was a text message. I'm an older millennial, he's like in the middle of millennial, so all we did was text. And we had kind of a rocky relationship, but my last text message to my brother was asking for him to be my son's godfather. And I didn't remember that until just now. It's really weird. But that is something I still have that text message printed out. So just my whole point here is that adversity is going to come, and you need people to be in your corner. The famous author, Seth Godin, talked about a time at one point where he shared with a lot of different people that he was so distraught and so in his own head that he had to listen to other people on repeat to put a new voice in his head. And sometimes that's what happens when you listen to a great radio show or a podcast. And I'm not saying we're great, but we're trying to do great things. I'm a producer, just like every one of you is in this room. I meet with people every single day at their office or at their kitchen table. I have literally gone to listing appointments, and I've had people say that, we're not going to work with you anymore. I mean, I've had those same types of conversations you have had, but I will tell you that this is one of my biggest passions, is communicating in this way. And so there's a couple of just screens there just showing some of the different people that have been on our podcast. Thank you, YPN, for having me here today. My name is Kyle Malnati, and I appreciate your time. I hope that this has been well worth your while, and I hope that something connected with you today so that you feel like you actually have a voice and you've got someone that cares about what you're doing today. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.